Hello, everyone, and welcome to our third session with Aphios Pharma, brought to you by KiwiTech, a growing ecosystem of entrepreneurs, investors, mentors, accelerators, incubators, and corporations. We help early and growth stage startups build viable products, drive traction, raise capital, and scale their businesses. And before we get started, I'd like to read a brief disclaimer. You should be well familiar with it by now if you've seen our first two sessions with Aphios. KiwiTech is not acting as a broker, dealer, or investment advisor, and is not registered with the Securities and Exchange Commission in any such capacities. At no time does KiwiTech provide investment advice, endorsement, analysis, or recommendations with respect to securities. Information contained herein should be viewed for entertainment purposes only. KiwiTech does not verify or assure that information provided by any issuer offering its securities is accurate or complete, or that the valuation of such securities is appropriate. Investing in securities, particularly in securities issued by startup companies, involves substantial risk, and investors should be able to bear the loss of their entire investment. For the full disclaimer, I urge you to check out our podcast page, which is successfullyfundedpodcast.com/disclaimer. I am your host, Doug French. You may also be familiar with me from the previous two Aphios sessions, and I'm very happy to bring about part three this afternoon. Our guests are from Aphios Pharma, which is developing FDA-approved cannabis-based drugs for pain, cancer pain, anxiety, opioid use disorder, and multiple sclerosis, and using its new delivery system to nano-encapsulate these cannabinoids in biodegradable polymer nanospheres to sustain their release and improve oral bioavailability, which in English means they're using this an excellent new delivery system to make cannabis more easily absorbed into our bodies and to stay there longer. Now, our first event, as you may recall, was just an overview with the basic pitch of what Aphios is about and how their system works. Session two was much more medical in nature. I talked about the medical trials and the data regarding cannabinoid therapies and how much more success we're seeing among physicians who are using it regularly in their treatments. And now we're going to talk about the business of cannabis as a medicine. So I'm going to bring on our guests right now. The first needs no introduction. He is our founder and CEO and Grand Poobah, Dr. Trevor Castor. And with him is Dr. Val Livada, who is one of the business advisors for Aphios, and Kathy Prillo, the controller. Everyone, welcome.
Thank you.
Hi, Dad.
Hello, everybody. Now let's get your screen up. Let's get the pitch deck up. That screen initially will be your presentation. And while you do that, I want to make sure everybody who's listening here knows that we're going to have a presentation from Dr. Castor now. And following that will be a Q&A. So if you're watching live and would like to post a question to the panel, I'll be monitoring that in the chat or in the Q&A down below. Otherwise, please enjoy this discussion about the business of cannabis as a medicine and what the real, when you offer your investment, this is what investors should expect in terms of return, in terms of how large this market is, and how much Aphios Pharma is poised to capture. So, Dr. Castor, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Dad, for the introduction. Now it's my turn to introduce Aphios Pharma, LLC. Aphios Pharma is a spin-off of Aphios Corporation, which is a green emerging growth biotechnology company developing enabling technology platforms and enhanced therapeutics for central nervous systems such as Alzheimer's disease, infectious diseases such as HIV, and cancers. Aphios Pharma is dedicated, however, to the development of cannabis-based FDA-approved drugs for cancer pain, opioid use disorder, anxiety, and multiple sclerosis. At this stage, I'd like to inform you of the securities law of 1933 and the Private Securities Litigation Reform Act of 1995 that provides a safe harbor for selling forward-looking statements. Our discussion may include predictions, estimates, or other information that might be considered forward-looking. While these forward-looking statements represent our current judgment on what the future holds, they are subject to risk and uncertainties that can cause actual results to differ materially. You are cautioned not to place undue reliance on these forward-looking statements, which reflect our opinions only as of the date of this presentation. Basically, you have to do your due diligence. Now, in this webinar, we'll cover the business and commercialization of cannabis and cannabinoids as a medicine. As Doug had mentioned in our first webinar, we introduced you to Aphios Pharma, and then last we talked about science and technology of cannabis. Both of these webinars are on our YouTube channel if you need to take a look back at that. I'm going to be presenting the business case for cannabis as medicine. I have over 30 years of experience, diversified experience in the technology and business development of startup biotech companies. My panelist will be Ms. Catherine Prillo, our controller, with 30 years of financial analysis and strategic planning experience, and our business advisor, Dr. Val Livada, who's a retired senior lecturer at the Sloan School of Management at MIT. Now, the cannabis marketplace consists of three major segments: recreational, medical, and pharmaceutical. The recreational marketplace, most of the individuals are interested in relaxation and getting high, and therefore are focused on high delta-9 THC cannabis products. And that's approved in 19 states, including the District of Columbia, as shown in the blue states in this map. The medical marijuana marketplace, on the other hand, is focused on the treatment of medical indications which are recommended by a medical doctor, practitioner. And it's focused on things like pain and anxiety. And the patients in this case are more focused on high CBD content marijuana because they're more interested in treatment rather than euphoric highs. Now, that's approved in, I believe, including the dark blue, in 37 states in the United States, plus the District of Columbia. Now, there's a lot of crosstalk between these marketplaces. Now, the pharmaceutical marketplace, on the other hand, has been around longer than either the recreational or medical marketplace. It started in 1985 with FDA approval of Marinol, which contains synthetic delta-9 THC for chemotherapy-induced nausea and vomiting. And of course, in the medical marijuana started in California in 1996. Now, this marketplace is the only marketplace which the federal government allows, approves marijuana use, and it allows interstate travel. It's governed by the Drug Enforcement Administration, or the DEA. Aphios Pharma has licenses, Schedule I licenses for both state and federal level from the DEA. Now, what are the drivers in the marketplace? Is legalization, an increase in social acceptance. But there are several challenges and constraints. The first one, of course, is the banking industry and related services, because these are federal organizations, and most of the approvals in the medical and recreational space on a statewide basis. And there's a lot of the interference, some coming in from the alcohol and tobacco and pharma industries as they are bolstering their position in cannabis market space. Now, increased legalization translates into more startups and smaller businesses competing for the same finance. And this is significant. There's a lack of consensus and support within healthcare and the scientific community regarding benefits of use. And these are the things that we will address with our clinical trial program. And then there's a complex regulatory structure of cannabis product approval by the FDA. Now, the medical marketplace, cannabis marketplace, the key players are in North America, Canada, and the United States. There are strong players in Europe and the Middle East, in particular Israel. And there's an emerging growth marketplace in Africa, Asia Pacific, and Latin America. And some of these players are listed, include Therapeutics and Glowbox, CannaGrow, International Consolidated Companies, Cannabis Sativa, Green Grow Technologies, and Lexaria. These are focused on the medical marijuana marketplace. Now, the opportunity in that marketplace is driven by pain management, muscle spasms, nausea, anorexia, and seizures. And you'll note that between 20 and 27, there's going to be a significant uptick in terms of pain management, in terms of the medical cannabis marketplace opportunity. Now, the pharmaceutical marketplace, synthetic cannabinoids have been approved by the FDA since 1985, and there are 4 of them, primarily delta-9 THC or derivatives. More recently, Epidiolex, which is a CBD compound, was approved by the FDA in 2018. It's the only cannabinoid from a plant source currently in the pharma industry. Now, this brand has emerged as a leading application segment in 2021, with a revenue share of about 96.97% in the marketplace. There's another compound called Sativex, which is a mixture of delta-9 THC and CBD for multiple sclerosis. And that's approved in Europe and Canada and about 26 other countries, but not the United States. Of course, Sativex has issues with its formulation and its containing of the psychoactive delta-9 THC. Part of the reason why it's not approved in the United States as yet. In Europe, it dominated the marketplace in 2021 in terms of the pharmaceutical industry for sales of pharmaceutical cannabis products. And the marketplace in Middle East Africa is continuing to expand at the fastest continuous compounded annual growth rate. Now, this was the head photo in the MG Bay magazine of July 22nd. And it shows there's a big renaissance in terms of research in the pharmaceutical marketplace. And this is driven by FDA approval of the natural CBD for Dravet syndrome or for childhood epilepsy, of course, which is Epidiolex. The DEA has increased cannabis cultivation licenses from 1 to 6 in the last year. More research is being done at major universities such as Harvard Medical School, for example, by Dr. Stacy Gruber, who was one of the keynote speakers in our last presentation. There's an increasing number of clinical trials for pain management, substance use disorder, anxiety disorder, including PTSD, sleep and other disorders. So it's acceptance and use by the National Football League. Now, the trends in share and opportunity are by 2028, the recreational marketplace is targeted to reach 146 billion with a compounded annual growth rate of 32.8%. The medical marketplace about 51.4% at 18.4%. And the pharmaceutical marketplace is with a tremendous growth rate, split off by some of the indications that I mentioned in my last slide by 104% to $127.4 billion. This is the marketplace that Aphios Pharma, a sandbox that Aphios Pharma is working with. And as a result of this marketplace, we developed Aphios Pharma in 2018 to service customers in this marketplace. We were organized as an LLC corporation, and the principal shareholder is Aphios Corporation with about 18 million membership units or 89.7% as of this offering. Now, our market, the customers of our market are cancer patients. This is our primary market for chemotherapy-induced peripheral neuropathic pain, CIPNP, and it's a common adverse event for around 50% of cancer patients, and there's no clear treatment currently. The marketplace for neuropathic pain is about $8.3 billion, and the cancer market segment is estimated to be about 42% of the global marketplace. Now, there's currently a widespread utilization of marijuana in treatment of cancer pain and in pain in general, but only for acutely. And research has shown that this CBD, for example, inhibits serotonin receptors and therefore manages pain, neuropathic pain. What we plan to do is nano-encapsulate CBD to increase its duration in the body and therefore its application for chronic use. Our second major customer market is substance use disorder. The city reports that overdoses from that in the United States are as high as 200%. In fact, last year, about 100,000 people died during the COVID pandemic from overdoses. And the current treatments like methadone are themselves opioids. And they develop, of course, that can cause addiction and does not exhibit any psychotropic effects with CBD. So CBD is our target, as shown by researchers such as Dr. Yasmin Hood at a university in New York, to alleviate cue-induced opioid addiction behaviors and allosteric modulate mu and opioid receptors. Our third market or third customer is for general anxiety disorder, which is a subsegment of about 4 anxiety components, including PTSD. It affects about 13% of the US population, about 40 million people. And it's growing quite rapidly to a fairly large factor. And it's one of the reasons that New Frontier Data Health says that a significant amount of medical cannabis is used for customers for anxiety. In a presentation, our last presentation, Dr. Stacy Gruber at Harvard Medical School showed that acute doses of CBD were found to reduce anxiety both in animals and humans without having an anxiogenic effect. And our fourth market is multiple sclerosis. Sativex is currently being used for multiple sclerosis, but there are certain formulation issues, and it's done on an acute basis, whereas we plan to do it on a chronic basis by nanoencapsulation. But it's an autoimmune disease which is with no progressive neurodegenerative condition. There's no known cure. Affects about 2.5 million people worldwide, about 400 million in the United States, and about 500,000 in Europe. They exceeds about $10 billion cost in the United States. And the substance that we are targeting is spasticity and chronic pain. And in terms of the overall, in a summary, the market opportunity for Aphios Pharma includes pain, opioid use disorder, anxiety, and multiple sclerosis. The largest market is pain, with a total accessible marketplace of $9.9 billion, and a specifically accessible marketplace for our products of $4.5 billion at a 5.6% CAGR. Opioid use disorder with about $4.9 billion for TAM and an SAM of $2.5 billion. Anxiety is quite large for a total addressable marketplace of over $19.8 billion. But the component that we are after is about $2.0 billion. And similarly, for multiple sclerosis, the marketplace is quite large, about $42 billion. But we are going after the marketplace, the SAM for pain and spasticity, which is about $1 billion. Our competition in the pharmaceutical marketplace includes Jazz Pharmaceuticals, which recently purchased GW Pharma for $7.6 billion after they got their Epidiolex approved for treating childhood epilepsy. Their strengths, of course, are FDA-approved drugs for epilepsy and MS product Sativex that is used in other countries. Some of the key weaknesses are these formulations are in sesame seed oil, has low bioavailability, and is subject to first-pass degradation by enzymes. The MS drug is a mixture of THC and CBD in an alcohol formulation that is administered mucosally, has issues with oversensitization and short-term efficacy, and can cause psychotropic effects from the delta-9 THC. Now, on the second tier, pharmaceutical companies like AbbVie and Par has dronabinol for treating CNIV, chemotherapy-induced nausea and vomiting. And similarly, their formulation is in sesame seed oil with some of the limitations. Now, on the third tier of our competition, there are companies like Merck, Sanofi, Eli Lilly, who are developing traditional drugs for some of the same indications. These drugs are typically chemical and synthetic based versus what we plan to bring to market, which is naturally based. It offers low efficacy and comes with significant side effects. Now, development plan or strategy is to manufacture pharmaceutical grade CBD, to scale up the technology for encapsulation of the CBD, and nano-encapsulated as shown in the diagram to the right, to conduct in vitro and in vivo studies, to file an IND, investigational new drug application with the FDA for nano-encapsulated cannabinoids, to conduct phase 2 clinical trials under 505(b)(2) pathway, which is allowed by the FDA because CBD has been approved as a drug for Epidiolex for childhood epilepsy. And THC also has been approved for Marinol for chemotherapy-induced nausea and vomiting. And then to conduct phase 3 pivotal clinical trials on safety and efficacy and obtain FDA approval through a new drug application. Now, these plans, after these plans, we will embark upon a commercialization strategy, which we have already started in terms of completing the market analysis, some of which you have seen, some of the customer segments which we have identified, and the financial analysis, which I'll discuss later. And then the go-to-market plan, where we define our commercial approach. Our commercial approach currently is primarily to do licensing agreements with pharmaceutical and biotechnology companies, multinational companies. Pricing strategy we have established already, channels of sales, and all these will be conducted in conjunction with our discussions on licensing agreements. And then to do a commercialization plan to go live, marketing investments, execute and engage in this plan, and if necessary, to accelerate and pivot on this plan and expand as the company grows in the future. Now, to execute on both the development and plan, we have a lean management team with unique advisors and key opinion leaders that includes myself, Dr. Judith Palmer, who's the Director of Clinical and Regulatory Affairs, Catherine Prillo, who is our Controller. You've met Dr. Livada, who's our Business Advisor, Dr. Atalanda, who's an MD neuroscientist, Glenn Hong, who is a chemical engineer, Stacy Gruber, who is a professor of psychiatry at Harvard Medical School and an anxiety expert, Dr. Brent Boyer, medical officer who will work with us in opioid use disorder, Dr. Todd Van der Raal, who's an expert on cancer pain and cannabis, Dr. Jerry King, who's another cannabis expert with supercritical fluid, both manufacturing and nano-encapsulation, Dr. Gordon Craig, who's a natural product chemist, and Dr. Steve Alexander on multiple sclerosis. Now, in terms of our financing strategies, our Aphios Corporation, the parent company, has spent about $48 million to date on developing, enabling technology platforms and knowledge used in the manufacturing and nano-encapsulation of cannabinoids. In peer-reviewed grant, of that $48 million, about $7.9 million have been provided by peer-reviewed grants, competitive grants from the National Cancer Institute, the National Institute of Drug Abuse, and the National Center for Complementary and Integrative Health. We're currently crowdfunding to raise $1 million to continue development studies, and then to do fundraising to raise an additional $29 million up to $30 million for CGMP manufacturing, to conduct IND enabling studies and file an IND with the FDA and conduct phase 2 clinical trials. Now, investment strategies are to do crowdfunding, as I previously discussed, for the individual investors. Next step are angel investors, high net worth investors, institutional, such as venture capital, private equity, hedge funds, SPACs, special purpose acquisition companies, and then an initial public offering on IPO, which we back to the individual investor. Now, of course, as we go along this pathway, the valuation is increasing, so the value to the individual investor will be higher at this stage than at the crowdfunding stage. So at this stage, I'd like to mention the Jobs Act of 2018, which is a game changer for ordinary investors. Before the Jobs Act, you would have needed to be an accredited investor with an annual income of $200,000 or more, or net worth of over $1 million, not including private residence, to invest in a company such as Aphios Pharma. This will allow you, the Jobs Act allows you as a private investor to invest as little as $250 in a safe investment through what is called Regulation C crowdfunding. How are they a risk? And at this stage, I have to inform you of some of the safe harbor investment risk associated with a company such as ours. We're a development stage business, which are subject to all of the risks that will be involved in a new company startup in terms of management, technology, regulatory issues. And additionally, this financial risk is, can we raise sufficient money to get to a phase 2B clinical trial to get to the next step of company and product development. And then, of course, it's a regulatory risk that we'll have to, and some of these risks are modulated by current developments. For example, the approval of Epidiolex by the FDA reduces some of the regulatory risk, but they're still there. We still have to go through clinical trials through the FDA and to have a successful phase 2B clinical trial. And then, of course, it's the market risk. Will the market be there to accept our product and the pricing that will provide a return to an investment? And there are a lot of other risks that are associated with a company such as Aphios Pharma. Our pro forma or projected revenues is that we will have no revenues in 2022 or 2023. We anticipate revenues of $45 million in 2024 from licensing agreement of our first cannabis-based product through after we've completed phase 2B proof of concept study, clinical study, and about $60 million in FY25. Our current valuation of company is $70 million. It's based on discounted cash flow analysis with a discount rate of about 35% plus a venture capital method. And with a crowdfunding investment of about $1 million, the valuation cap is $71 million. Now, as an investor, your exit strategy will be based on a corporate partnership or merging agreement that Aphios Pharma executes with a multinational pharmaceutical company, such as Jazz Pharma, Merck, Biogen, AbbVie, Pfizer. In the second option, we seek to out-license nanotechnologies as early as possible in the development cycle. In our third option, if those are not achieved, we'll raise $100 million in an IPO to continue clinical development towards a phase 3 clinical trial and commercialization of nanotechnologies for our different indications: CNIP, anxiety, opioid use disorder, and multiple sclerosis. Now, as an investor in this round, you will be able to exit on execution of an M&A in option 1 or an IPO in option 3. In a ways, we have generated multiple opportunities for investors to exit. Aphios Pharma was founded in 2018, as I indicated, and we have done an exclusive license of 16 US patents and 4 pending patents from Aphios Corporation. We have access to manufacturing equipment and CGMP facilities, and we have DA Schedule 1 license. Over the period 2021 to 2023, we'll conduct clinical and business development, including phase 2 clinical trials and making contacts with commercial partners. The first opportunity to exit will be in phase 2B in 2024, and it will be based on a milestone-based worldwide license with upfront payments, which are typical historical for the biotech industry, of about $45 million. In 2025, we will also seek a pre-commercialization exit opportunity through a mergers and acquisition with a large pharma such as a Sanofi, Jazz, or Fujimoto. And in that, we envision about over $200 million upfront with about $1 billion in bio dollars. Bio dollars are dollars which are based on achievement of certain milestones as well as royalties. Alternatively, if that's not achieved in 2026, we'll do an IPO to raise $100 million to conduct phase 3 clinical trials and sell about 10 to 20% of the company to the public. Thereafter, we'll conduct phase 3 clinical trials, and an opportunity in 2027 plus will exist for a phase 3 exit with a company such as Jazz Pharma, and based on current metrics at a valuation of about $7 billion. I'd like to thank you for your interest. We're addressing a massive problem and opportunity. We have a vastly experienced team with key opinion leaders. We have patented manufacturing and drug delivery nanotechnologies benefiting from decades of development with multiple exit opportunities. At this time, I'd like to turn my slides over to our host for any questions and answers that you may have. Again, thank you for your attention.
And thank you, Dr. Castor. That was really informative, especially given the opportunities that you outlined toward the end there in terms of a very specific idea of where where the company could be in the next 4 or 5 years, very specific thoughts about your exit strategy. And I wanted to, there was one bit that I wanted to talk about that leads into, as you say, that 29 million that you're going to raise. But I wanted also to involve Dr. Livada and Kathy Prillo in these discussions. I wanted to ask now, Dr. Livada, as a business advisor, let's talk about your role at the company and the overall view you have about the investment climate right now, and how you think Aphios' strategy fits into that overall climate as equity crowdfunding blossoms after the Jobs Act.
Oh, sure, Doug. Thanks. Look, I've had the immense pleasure of working with Trevor for over 10 years now on our Aphios Corporation, and seeing the kinds of skills and capabilities that he brings and the team brings to the party. And when it comes to looking at the present opportunity for investors in Aphios Pharma, this might sound a little flippant for serious investors that are used to this, but look, when you make an investment decision, there are two components here, and one is the data-driven, which is the brain, and the other one is the instinctive decision, which is the gut. And you have to have a kind of balance between the two. I think Trevor provided all the interesting data for the first to analyze how do you make an investment decision based on real clear information. On the instinctive side, where I play a bigger role as a general business advisor, when I look at the space, it is a very, very interesting space, to say the least. With cannabis being now legalized, it's undeniable that there is a huge interest in this space from a lot of investors and a lot of professionals, a lot of consumers, pharmaceutical companies, and so on. So it is a very ripe sector for a lot of interesting developments. Similarly, from the application perspective, the neurological disease space is getting more and more attention from practitioners, from academics, and so on, for obvious reasons. These are some of the most difficult and very illnesses that impact us in very big ways. So there is a lot of stuff going on in this space, and Aphios, I think, is very well positioned to take advantage of what's going on here, mostly because they've spent over 20 years in the area of trying to understand how do you manufacture and encapsulate nanoparticles. And that's going to be very critical to the ability of delivering CBD-based pharmaceutical products to the market. So I think it's a confluence of very positive factors that investors have to take into account. The last thing that we need to think about is that actually, in addition to the concerns that Trevor indicated at the end of the presentation, there's also the concern of the present financial situation out there. Everybody knows the markets are unpredictable right now. There's a lot of concern of what's going to go on, what's happening right now. Are we going into a recession or not? We have stories about venture capital funds tightening up their belts, driving harder deals. But overall, a situation like this sometimes is actually very positive because you can, make an investment and enter into an opportunity at a time where the terms are better actually than in good times. So any investor has to take into account all of these issues, and then, as I said, make a decision based on a balance between the brain and the gut.
So somewhere in the sternum, I'm guessing, if you look at the midpoint between those two.
Well, yes.
Maybe somewhere in the upper
Whatever
throat,
makes you
upper gastric
but,
area.
The point is not to go with one against the other completely.
Right. Now, I also wanted to address, and I wanted to bring Kathy on board here to talk a bit about the investment thresholds that Dr. Castor mentioned. There's that initial 1 million crowdfund goal, which we're talking about here. Then there's a threshold to raise another 29 million, and ultimately to get to that magical 9-figure value of 100 million. And so I think a lot of potential investors are wondering now about the fate of their shares on either side of that $100 million goal. So if you do, whether you do or do not reach that $100 million goal, what will happen to the shares that you're offering in this endeavor?
So the safe investments that investors are allowed to make now, they're really not equity per se, right? They're shareholder units and they're a percentage of the company. So to the extent that the market cap goes up, your share of the company goes down, but your value per share goes up. So so it all kind of plays together. But naturally, there's risk with any investment, and I don't want to mislead investors by saying it's all going to be great, because it is a risk. I don't know, Dr. Castor, if you had. I'm confident based on the market that all of this is achievable. 100 million represents a 7% cumulative average growth rate over the next 5 years. So it's not unachievable.
Well, yeah, we can talk about that too, because there is when we talk about the phases now, there is a particular interest in that next 29 million that you mentioned, Dr. Castor. So when we talk about strategies to raise that, how will your strategy shift? You mentioned you gave that hierarchy, that tree of people you'll be approaching, angel investors, other VC thoughts, and to increase your overall cap table. So what are your strategies, assuming once you get into 7 figures with that first million, what happens next?
Well, then we'll have to go to what's called a Reg A plus type investment strategy, where we're going after institutional investors and some high net worth investors. At that stage, probably we will hire an investment banker to basically reach out to target companies. We'll also look at strategic corporate partners who might be interested in participating with the company, because they typically have a vested interest in products being developed with this type of technology, and they can share in the upside of it by doing an investment at that stage. So we look at both institutional investors, strategic corporate partners, which I had not mentioned in my slide presentation. There is an opportunity in terms of doing a early stage, depends upon what SPACs we can address. Special purpose acquisition companies are around right now, and there are a lot of them looking for opportunities because they have 2 years before they can basically spend their money without losing money. And so that might be an opportunity also. But our focus initially is going to be on institutional investors through a Reg A. Less so on hedge funds, less so on private equity, then maybe SPACs, and then of course, looking at strategic corporate partners.
Well, and I think as we get close to the to quarter of the hour, I think one of the main things we could leave investors with is in particular, because we've talked about in the previous discussions, there's plenty of data out there about the power of cannabis and how cannabis is being used as a medicine and how the data are pouring in saying how salutary and effective it can be. But the main story of Aphios is the nanotech, is the delivery system. So when we talk about that place in the overall market, I mean, Dr. Livada mentioned an overall bullish nature about where pharma is going and where innovations in pharma can go. So when you look at the market for cannabis as a medicine, and now this revolutionary disruptive delivery system, which as I recall from, I think our initial discussion, increases the absorption value in the body by about 5 to 7x. How does that factor into your overall outlook for where Aphios could be in 2 or 3 years once this new technology takes hold?
Well, it's a potential, it's our flagship product, nano-encapsulation. And so where we'll lead with that flagship is a potential to do license agreements with other farmers of nano-encapsulation of their products for their application, where we'll develop licensing fees and arrangements. But we have to demonstrate both in vivo and in human the efficacy of this product. Once we have done that, for example, you can envision nano-encapsulation of delta-9 THC for glaucoma drops. Now, that's not one of our lead products, but that may be a product for another company, pharmaceutical company that's interested in ophthalmology. So there'll be a lot of other opportunities for our technology to not only develop our products, but other compounds for pharmaceutical companies and biotechnology companies.
And this will be more of a license agreement as opposed to white labeling the technology. I mean, is there a distinction there in terms of how your revenue streams will evolve?
Our revenue streams right now are focused on licensing a specific product. And if we don't do a merger and acquisition, driving to market through direct sales force of getting that product to market. But, you know, we speak about pivoting on the strategic analysis. And one of the pivots could be in terms of licensing the technology to other pharma companies for delivering their products.
I think that's the really important point, because as you lay out this plan for a startup company, you said that right away. You have to really be prepared to pivot as pivots require them. Do you see any other opportunities where Aphios might have to pivot in the short or longer term in order to reach the goals, the very lofty and yet attainable goals that you've set for yourself?
You know, we've been very successful in getting funding from the National Institutes of Health and the Department of Defense. In the interim, while we try to achieve that $29 million raise, we will seek funding from the NIH and the Department of Defense for doing research on cannabis-based products and utilizing our nano-encapsulation technology for some of the indications I mentioned. For example, PTSD. We didn't mention that, but that's a big issue with respect to the Department of Defense. And so that's it's not necessarily a pivot, but it's a way to basically ameliorate some delay in terms, if there's any delay in financing.
Well, as I've told you since the outset, Dr. Castor, this whole science is fascinating, especially given this revolutionary delivery system that you have. And I think the main issue is just going to be how to make sure enough people are aware of that it exists and how effective it is in order to reach that goal and demonstrate that to to investors who aren't as aware of the arcane nature of medicine and in these particular therapies and treatments as you are. And the real challenge, I think, will be communication of that fact and the showcase of this new. I mean, I as someone who is less aware of this terminology, you know, I was blown away by it when you were able to explain it to me. And if you could extrapolate that out to a waiting public, I think a lot of opportunity is waiting, and those financial goals that you've set, as I mentioned, are very attainable. And as we reach the quarter of the hour, I want to thank Dr. Trevor Castor and his guests, Dr. Val Livada and Kathy Prillo. Thanks again for joining us for round 3 of our discussions with Aphios Pharma and their nanotech system for delivering cannabis as a medicine. Thank you all for watching, and we will see you next time with our video events from Kiwi Tech.
Thank you, Dad.
Thank
Have
you
a great
all.
day.
Thanks,
Thanks everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.